right. Thank you for being punctual. We'll go ahead and begin. You might just take a little bit of time as you have a chance to study this introductory comments that I made, and you can use it if you want to, but because our lesson is dealing with Jesus, dealing with Gentile people, I decided to take the approach that it's incumbent upon us to realize that God is bringing the world to us. And sometimes we just need to be on guard not to be in any way shaped by our biases and prejudices when it comes even to ministering to all people. And so I actually introduced a term that's ethnocentric. Ethnocentric really means, in a nutshell, that every culture of the world believes that their culture is superior. I mean, even the most primitive tribes, they believe the way they do things and the traditions they hold to are better than everybody else. And so it's a real thing that we have to be on guard against, because as Americans, it's really easy to be ethnocentric. Mm-hmm. And therefore we might look down upon people of other races or other cultures. And yet as Christians, to me, that's a counter when people accuse somebody of being racist or something like that. The best counter people could answer would be, I'm a Christian. We don't believe that at all. We believe every person is equal before God. And yet I never hear anybody take that defense when they're accused of that kind of intolerance. But anyway, I just kind of build this thought that we have to be careful to be more like Jesus, because Jesus was not ethnocentric. Everybody was equal to Jesus, and he died for everybody. Okay? So what goes on in the context of this, Jesus, of course, we've jumped over a little bit of chapter 6, but in what we're not dealing with, he feeds the 5,000, he walks on the water, and so he continues doing these healing ministries. He does these miraculous things. His reputation and fame is just getting bigger and bigger everywhere he goes. And so what ends up happening is that Jesus isn't finding any rest anywhere. Okay, even though we talked about him taking his apostles away to a secret place, to try to get some rest, he's having a hard time, because everywhere he goes, everybody recognizes him, and they flock there, all right? At the beginning of chapter 7, it's kind of interesting. There's this encounter with the religious group. And at every turn now, they have rejected Jesus, and they are making their best effort to try to discredit him. And so at the end of chapter 7, or where our lesson picks up today, Jesus has decided to leave his adopted hometown of Capernaum, and he heads all the way up to the ancient areas of the Phoenicians, which is outside of Israel. And he goes to the city of Tyre. All right, and that's where our story picks up. And you'll see there just before the big idea, Tyre is about 35 miles northwest of the Sea of Galilee, but it's actually in what's modern Lebanon today. Okay? It was a Roman province and primarily a Gentile area. All right, so our big idea is this. Jesus breaks down walls to show compassion to all people. And that's illustrated in his dealings with, first of all, this Syrophoenician woman who comes to Jesus in a desperate need. And so that's the first thought there, the humble. This woman shows great humility by coming to Christ. Jesus isn't even in this place very long before people start recognizing him. Yeah, Jason?
Well, he would have been preceded by the demoniac.
Yes, well, not here, not for Phoenicia.
Okay.
You're exactly right. We're going to get to that when he gets down to the Decapolis cities. 2 different places, though. Okay? Good point, though. Now, I definitely want to emphasize that, because I think that's exactly right. I really do. But I do believe that Jesus is recognized even up here in the area outside of Israel, because people have heard about Jesus, his reputation, some of the great fame. Some may have been in the audience when he fed 5,000 people. Who knows? But in any way, in any event, in short order, he's recognized up there. Well, as soon as he's recognized, this woman comes to Jesus in a desperate condition. And what was the problem? What is she appealing to Jesus for?
Help her daughter.
Yes. Her daughter is vexed with an evil spirit. It has totally destroyed their life. And she comes to Jesus with this great appeal that he would please help. And she acts in humility, reverence, worship as she bows down at Jesus' feet. And I went ahead and included how Matthew shares this story in 15:25. It says, Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. I think that's a beautiful thing. Mark doesn't say it that way, but Matthew expands on it. But that's what she needed. She needed help. Well, what I want to talk about, and by the way, I include a note there because this whole story is really reminiscent of the story of Elijah when he is fleeing from the presence of Ahab and Jezebel, and he goes up to the widow at Zarephath. Zarephath's just a few miles north of Tyre. So here again is a Syrophoenician woman who has a child. What happened to her child? The widow's child at Zarephath. He died after she had been so kind and gracious to Elijah, and God had provided the meal and the oil never to run out. But the boy died, and Elijah raises him from the dead. But it's right up there in the same place, basically. And the parallels are there. All right. Jesus is going to put the woman through a test. And really, I'm asking the question very candidly. But how would you answer someone who accused Jesus of being mean-spirited toward the Gentile woman? What was it Jesus said when she came and begged that Jesus would heal her daughter?
That it's not right for them to take the food of the children and give it to the dogs.
Give it to the dogs. Yeah. And that seems like a harsh response from the Lord. But I really think the way it should be understood is that he's really kind of testing her to see if she's going to give up on her importunity, right? Okay? But you'll notice that one thing I want to highlight in this was a well-known proverb in the day of Jesus. And it really, you can see my comment there after the possible answers in the middle of the second bullet. First of all, Jesus was probably quoting a well-known proverb of his day, the intent of which was to question whether a particular course of action was appropriate. That you don't share the bread, take it from the children, and give it to the dogs. Okay? So Jesus' reference to the bread and the children is talking primarily of the Jewish people. And that's the way it's to be understood. And the proverb that equates dogs to Gentiles was not a term of affection. But Jesus cites this quote, right? What's really interesting is he's wondering, will she stop? Is this where it's going to end? That I make this rebuff to her? Well, instead, she responds in a beautiful and tender way, right? In fact, Jesus is really impressed with her response. In verse 28, she said, Yes, Lord, but even the dogs get to eat the crumbs of the children that fall on the ground. Right? And so verse 29 reveals that Jesus is really impressed with her response. I again included Matthew 15's response because Jesus, in Matthew, it says it this way. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. So because of her humility, because of her really great faith, which is specifically stated in Matthew's account, Jesus heals this girl from a distance. This is the only time in Mark's gospel where it ever mentions Jesus heals someone from a distance. But he just basically said, go, she's healed. And she was from that very moment. Okay? Now there are other accounts in some of the other gospels that talk about Jesus healing someone from a distance. The centurion servant, remember? The centurion begged Jesus to come, and he said, hey, I've not seen such great faith. And it's interesting, when he reserves those kinds of comments, oftentimes it's for Gentiles. And it is in this case too. Okay? So, the second point real quickly, the outsider. Jesus leaves the area of the Syrophoenician woman's area up at Tyre and Sidon, and he heads back south. And he goes by the Sea of Galilee, but he doesn't go to Capernaum. He just skirts the Sea of Galilee, probably on the east side, and goes down to the area that the Bible identifies as the Decapolis. All right? And so the Decapolis just literally in Greek means 10 cities. But they are Greco-Roman cities. These are Gentile cities primarily. There are very few Jews that live in these places. Those of us who have been, we have visited at Beth Shan, and some of us over in Jordan have seen Jerash. These are beautifully Roman cities with the colonnades down the Cardo and that kind of thing. It's just a really impressive thing. But in this case, as soon as Jesus comes into the Decapolis area, these friends bring their friend who is deaf and speech impaired. Now, he's not mute. All of us have probably been introduced to someone that has had a hearing loss. And don't you understand that a lot of times they have a problem learning speech? Because if they can't hear themselves, they don't know how their words are coming out, right? That seems to be the implication of this. And so his friends bring him to Jesus, not unlike what we read in Mark 5 about the friends who brought their paralytic friend to Jesus, busted up the roof and lowered him down, right? There are friends involved because this man would probably not be able to articulate his own deficiencies, his own needs. His friends brought him. And I find that to be a pretty interesting thing. Okay, does anybody remember, what does Jesus do? What's Jesus do, first of all, related to his hearing? Okay, good. And I think the clear implication is even the man's not completely aware of what Jesus is going to do. So in a way of reaching out and touching the man, he reaches out and puts his fingers in his ears with the implication that I'm dealing with this issue. All right? So a touch from Jesus right at the man's ears. What's he do with his tongue? The implication is that Jesus, now this is so foreign to our culture that we would find this repulsive, but Jesus spit, and then with his own finger, he touches the tongue of the man. And I think that the understanding is automatic. For that man, he understood that what Jesus was doing was sharing his ability to speak with the man by doing that. And immediately, he could both hear and speak. And so there was an amazing miracle there, and everybody I wonder what he said.
Don't do that.
That's no, I imagine a thank you was probably somewhere in order. But what did Jesus command him to do? What did Jesus command him and his friends to do once he had healed the man?
Tell nobody.
Yeah, don't tell anybody. Now, that's the point I want to emphasize, Jason, because you brought it up. But it's interesting to me that Jesus regularly tells these people not to broadcast what they have done. Do you realize there's only one example where Jesus said to someone, go home and tell your friends and your loved ones, your family? What case was that?
Woman at the well.
No.
The
The woman at the well did do that, but Jesus never told her not to.
He didn't
Right.
instruct her to.
Yes, the maniac who lived in the tombs at Gadara, right? And does anybody remember when Jesus, he wanted to go with Jesus after Jesus healed him. He said, I want to be one of your disciples. I want to follow you. Jesus said, no, you go home. And you tell your friends and your family what?
The great thing that you did.
All of the great things that have been done for you. And he went where? And broadcasted to everybody. The Decapolis. Do you realize it's very possible that it was the witness of the maniac who had been healed that broadcast what Jesus had done for him? Maybe that's how the friends knew that Jesus is here when Jesus was in the Decapolis area, and they brought their friend, this deaf and speech impaired man. And so I just kind of wondered if that connection existed, but I thought it was kind of interesting that in all of Mark's accounts, Jesus is saying, don't tell anybody except in that one case. And it was in the area of the Decapolis that he broadcast it. Okay? All right, and then the final thought there, and that's dealing somewhat with this maniac question. But he went there, told it, and again, now Jesus told these guys, don't tell anybody. But what happened?
They told it.
They broadcast it everywhere. You know, I find it funny because it happens regularly. In Matthew chapter 8, he tells the leper that he cleanses, don't tell anybody, go show yourself to the priest. And the guy probably did that. But Mark's account tells us that he went and told everybody. You know, he couldn't contain himself. Hey, when God has touched you, it really is hard to contain yourself.
Yes.
And I think that's just a powerful illustration of how it should be for us when we've been touched in a most miraculous way and saved for eternity. It should be something that's pretty easy for us to go and broadcast to everybody, right? And so got an opportunity with that, with this plant, tend, and harvest, gather up. We're certainly looking forward to what the Lord's going to do with that, okay? So I think you'll have a lot of fun with this lesson.